Hey guys, Dimension Master Studios here, how y'all doing? So, at the time of me releasing this video, today marks the 2-year anniversary of the release of Part 2 of Crystalized, one of the most divisive and hated things that we've ever gotten when it comes to Ninjago. With a lot of people, myself included, really not liking what we got during Part 2 and really Crystalized in general. And in today's video, I wanted to talk about by far one of the most divisive things that we got during Part 2, with that obviously being Harumi's redemption. In today's video, I want to take a look at Harumi's redemption during the final 2 episodes of Crystalized, talk about it, and explain why it really doesn't work. So, let's get into this whole thing. So, when it comes to Harumi's redemption during the final 2 episodes of the season, I feel like there are 4 major issues that we have when it comes to this, with all 4 of these things causing Harumi's redemption at the end of the season to really not make any sense when you really think about them, and in this video I'm going to be breaking down each of these reasons and explaining why none of them really work for Harumi's redemption. So now let's get into this whole thing. Starting off with the first major issue, the setup, or rather the lack of setup. This I feel is a major issue when it comes to Harumi's redemption, and it's that the show doesn't really do anything to set this up. All throughout the events of Crystalized, we constantly see Harumi being completely loyal to the Overlord and doing whatever she can to serve him and help him out. And the season never once does anything to hint at the idea of Harumi potentially turning against the Overlord and siding with the ninja. So when Harumi does ultimately betray the Overlord during the second to last episode of the season, this is a moment that genuinely feels like it comes out of nowhere, and it doesn't really fit with Harumi's character given what we saw with her over the events of Crystalized. Because again, there really isn't any proper setups to this happening, and in the one instance where we do get any kind of setup for this, I'd argue it doesn't really work that well as setup for Harumi's redemption. So what I'm talking about happens during episode 17 of Crystalized, where during this episode, after the Overlord returns, he orders for the council to kill Lloyd, and the council members are completely fine with this, except for Harumi. She is against the idea of Lloyd getting hurt, and she even tries to help Lloyd escape at one point during the events of the episode. However, this is something that does not make any sense at all for Harumi because, 1, the show has made it incredibly clear that Harumi hates Lloyd and she wants him to suffer. Seasons 8 and 9 in particular made that crystal clear that Harumi does not like Lloyd. However, secondly, and more importantly, this is inconsistent with Harumi's character for what we saw in the episodes both before this and even after this. Because during episodes 13, 14, 16, and 18, Harumi has absolutely no problem with hurting Lloyd and making him suffer in one way or another. So how come all of a sudden during episode 17 Harumi is all of a sudden against the idea? It doesn't make any sense at all, and it's never properly explained why Harumi is acting like this. So with Harumi being against the idea of Lloyd getting hurt during this episode, I'd argue that doesn't really work as setup for Harumi's redemption, because this moment feels really inconsistent with Harumi's character given what we see from her during the events of Crystalized. And the closest thing that we do get to an explanation in episode 19 when the Overlord says,
"You should have destroyed him when you had the chance, but I see now that you still have feelings for him."
This is something that also doesn't make any sense at all and is once again inconsistent with Harumi's character, given that, like I said earlier, the Oni trilogy, especially season 8, made it incredibly clear that Harumi hates Lloyd and she wants him to suffer.
I want you to feel the emptiness that I feel. When your father is reborn, he won't be the man you recognize. His soul will be gone, and I want his cold hands to destroy you!
Let her go! This is between us!
No, Lloyd. There was never anything between us.
This is what I wanted. To see your father's return, and for you to lose everything. How does it feel to see the end?
So when it comes to the setup for Harumi's redemption, like I said, there really isn't any proper setup, and what the show does give us, I'd argue, is more inconsistent with Harumi's character, both when you take a look at the Oni trilogy, as well as during the events of Crystalized. So moving on from this, now we have the next big issue with Harumi's redemption, with that being Harumi's motivation. And Harumi's motivation when it comes to her turning against the Overlord during Crystalized doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about it. And the reason why I say that is for a few reasons. So for starters, when it comes to Harumi, the reason why she fights against the Overlord is because the Overlord reveals that he's the one who corrupted the Great Devourer. That's it. That is literally the only reason why Harumi fights against the Overlord. She doesn't do it because she realizes what she's been doing is wrong. She doesn't do it out of the goodness of her heart. She doesn't even do it because the Overlord had been forcing her to do bad things, and this was the first chance that she had to turn against the Overlord. No, instead, the only reason why Harumi decides to turn against the Overlord is for a completely selfish reason. All throughout the events of Crystalized, Harumi was fine with the Overlord doing bad stuff and him turning Ninjago into the Crystal Apocalypse, with her showing no signs of being against this. The closest thing that we ever got was towards the end of episode 19, when Harumi was mildly annoyed at the idea of the Overlord attacking Ninjago City, and even then that's literally the only moment that we get where Harumi is seemingly against the idea of the Overlord doing what he's doing. And that's it. Again, when it comes to Harumi, she's seemingly fine with the Overlord doing all this bad stuff, and she doesn't have any real objections with it. That is, however, until the penultimate episode, where again, the Overlord reveals something that directly affects Harumi, so she decides to fight against him. Meaning that again, when it comes to Harumi, she's not turning against the Overlord for some good or noble reason, she's doing it for a completely selfish reason. And we know that when it comes to Harumi, she was aware of the Overlord and how he was gonna do bad things, and Harumi didn't have any problem with this. During episode 13 of Crystalized, after Harumi learned that the Overlord was responsible for resurrecting her and helping her out, Harumi told the Overlord,
I can't serve you. You'll destroy everything.
And this episode establishes that Harumi knows who the Overlord is, and she knows that working for him is gonna result in bad things happening, yet she still decides to willingly work alongside him anyways. And speaking of Harumi willingly working alongside the Overlord, in literally the next episode, when Harumi tries to kill the original 4 ninja using the explosive spider bombs, she straight up tells Lloyd,
I can't, Lloyd. I mean, I could, technically, but I won't.
Making it clear that Harumi is willingly doing the terrible stuff that she's doing, and the Overlord is not forcing her to do bad things. Meaning that, again, like I said, when it comes to Harumi, she's not turning against the Overlord for some good or noble reason, with, again, her realizing what she's been doing is wrong or anything. Again, no, she's only turning against the Overlord because he revealed something that directly affected her, which, again, is a completely selfish reason. Yet the show still portrays Harumi as being in the right for doing this because she's fighting against the Overlord, even though, again, she's doing it for a completely selfish reason, which doesn't make any sense at all. However, that's not all, because there's 2 other big issues that I want to bring up when it comes to Harumi's motivation. For starters, something that doesn't make any sense at all when it comes to Harumi fighting against the Overlord is because of her getting mad at the Overlord for being the one to corrupt the Great Devourer, and the reason why I say that is because during the events of Crystalized, Harumi had literally no issue working alongside Pythor, the person responsible for unleashing the Great Devourer in the first place. Both Pythor and the Overlord had a part to play in the Great Devourer killing Harumi's parents, yet Harumi showed absolutely no issue working alongside Pythor, even though, again, he unleashed the Great Devourer, but once the Overlord revealed that he corrupted the Great Devourer, then Harumi has a problem working alongside him. Why? Why is Harumi fine working alongside Pythor and not the Overlord? It's something that doesn't make any sense at all. And also, one other thing that I want to bring up, the show never once implies that Harumi is unaware of Pythor being the one to unleash the Great Devourer. And given the fact that when it comes to Harumi, she could get access to information like the story of the Oni and the Dragon and the tale of the first Spinjitzu Master, and given that multiple forms of Ninjago media have made it pretty clear that Pythor's actions are well known, I mean, during Day of the Departed, we learn about the Hall of Villainy, a part of Ninjago's museum literally dedicated to the various villains that the ninja fought against, with Pythor being one of the villains on display there. You seriously mean to tell me that Harumi was unaware of Pythor being the one responsible for unleashing the Great Devourer? That doesn't make any sense at all. And so again, I ask the question, Why is it that Harumi is fine working alongside Pythor during the events of Crystalized, but not the Overlord? That doesn't make any sense at all, given that, again, the two of them both had a part to play in the Great Devourer killing her parents. Although, speaking of the Great Devourer killing Harumi's parents, that's something else that I want to bring up here, because something that Crystalized seemingly forgot about was a major reason why Harumi became a villain in the first place. While, yes, the Great Devourer killing Harumi's parents was a reason why she became a villain, it wasn't the only reason. Another big reason why Harumi became a villain is because as a result of the Great Devourer killing her parents, she grew to have issues with the ninja. Issues that, by the way, are never brought up or addressed at any point during the events of Crystalized. The season completely ignores a major reason why Harumi became a villain in the first place, and it essentially acts like the only reason why Harumi became a villain was just because her parents died, which again, that isn't true. But again, the season acts like it is the only reason why Harumi became a villain. Now, I've made it pretty clear when it comes to my channel that personally, I feel like when it comes to Harumi's hatred of the ninja, it's something that doesn't really make a lot of sense when you really think about it. However, it's still a big part of why Harumi became a villain in the first place, so it feels really weird that Crystalized effectively ignores this, and again, it acts like the only reason why Harumi became a villain was just because of her parents dying. Which again, like I've been saying, that's not the only reason why Harumi became a villain. And so overall, when it comes to Harumi's motivation for doing what she does during the final 2 episodes, again, it's something that doesn't really make a lot of sense when you take into account Harumi's character, as well as what we've seen from Harumi over the events of the show, especially when it comes to some of the things that happened during Crystalized. Moving on from this, we then have the next big issue with Harumi's redemption, and that is the aftermath of it and how Harumi was affected, or to be more accurate, the lack of an effect that we saw on Harumi. This is something that me and a lot of other fans usually tend to bring up whenever we talk about Harumi's redemption, but during the final 2 episodes of Crystalized, we never see Harumi taking any accountability for the horrible stuff that she did. During the final 2 episodes of Crystalized, we never see Harumi taking any accountability for any of the horrible stuff that she did. She never apologizes to Lloyd and the other ninja for what she did, and we don't see Harumi showing any real signs of sympathy and remorse for any of the horrible stuff that she did. Instead, the show essentially acts like all because Harumi did one good thing for completely selfish reasons, it means that she's been completely absolved of all the horrible stuff that she did, and the season effectively acts like Harumi never did anything wrong in the first place, which doesn't make any sense at all. Because, while yes, Harumi did do something good by fighting against the Overlord, that doesn't automatically absolve her of all the truly awful stuff that she's done over the events of the show. Stuff like her taking over Ninjago City by force multiple times, resurrecting 2 of Ninjago's greatest villains, including Lord Garmadon, who she forced to be a villain even though Garmadon never wanted to be a bad guy in the first place. Harumi only resurrected him that way because it's what she wanted, not because it's what he wanted. And she also brought back the Overlord, the literal embodiment of all evil and darkness when it came to Ninjago. She treated Lloyd absolutely terribly and she ruined his life in any way that she could. She tried to kill the ninja on multiple occasions during the events of the season. Her actions during Crystalized ultimately led to the Crystal Apocalypse happening. Her actions led to the death of a ton of innocent people, including the Emperor and Empress of Ninjago, who were her adoptive parents, and so much more. The show completely ignores every single horrible thing that Harumi ever did, and it shows her ending up on good terms with the ninja following her doing one good thing by fighting against the Overlord, and we end up getting one of the worst lines in all of Ninjago, with Lloyd telling the other members of the ninja team,
It's okay. She's with us.
And I feel like when it comes to Harumi not showing any real sympathy and remorse for what she does, I feel like this goes to show that Harumi wasn't really affected by what happened during the fight against the Overlord. Given that, again, when it came to Harumi, she only fought against the Overlord for a completely selfish reason, I'd argue that when it comes to Harumi, she wasn't really affected by it in any real way, especially since, again, Harumi wasn't doing this for some good or noble reason, and again, it's not like Harumi realized that what she had been doing was wrong, and I feel like the show, especially Harumi not acknowledging any of the terrible stuff that she did, I feel like that just goes to show that when it comes to Harumi, again, she wasn't really affected by what happened during the fight against the Overlord. Also, 2 other things that I want to bring up. When it comes to Tommy Andreasen, the co-creator of Ninjago, on an interview that he was on the TTV YouTube channel, he said that when it comes to Harumi's redemption, it is something that is up to interpretation, meaning that it's entirely possible that Harumi was not affected by what happened during the final 2 episodes of Crystalized, and it's entirely possible that she is still a bad guy. In fact, something that I've even talked about a few times is the idea that during the final episode of Crystalized, Harumi is just pulling another Season 8 and she's pretending to be a good person in order to try and manipulate people, which I'd argue would make a lot more sense for Harumi's character, rather than her just all of a sudden ending up on good terms with the ninja all because she did one good thing, even though the show has made it incredibly clear that Harumi hates the ninja and she has a lot of problems with them. And again, I feel like Harumi's redemption being left up to interpretation goes to show that Harumi may not have even been affected by what happened during the final 2 episodes. But also, when it comes to Tommy Andreasen, he also said that he considers Harumi to be irredeemable. And given that the co-creator of the show himself said that he doesn't think that Harumi can be redeemed, I feel like that also goes to show that when it comes to Harumi, again, it's entirely possible that she was not affected by what happened to her during these final 2 episodes. And again, it's entirely possible she is still a bad guy. And all this connects into what I said earlier about the lack of this having any real effect on Harumi, because again, it's entirely possible that when it comes to Harumi, she wasn't really affected by her fight against the Overlord, and it's entirely possible that she is still a bad guy, especially since, again, the show does literally nothing to acknowledge all the horrible stuff that Harumi did, and she takes zero accountability for any of the truly awful stuff that she's done over the events of the franchise. And now we have the last, and in my opinion, by far the biggest overall problem when it comes to Harumi's redemption, and it's the reason why I've been putting redemption in air quotes every time I bring it up, and it's that I'd argue that Harumi's redemption during Crystalized isn't even a redemption. When you boil everything down, Harumi's redemption is basically just her blaming someone else for her problems, and then Harumi acting like she never did anything wrong, because that's exactly what happened. Like I said earlier, when it comes to Harumi, the only reason why she fights against the Overlord is because of the reveal that he's the one who corrupted the Great Devourer, and that's it. Again, it's not like Harumi is realizing what she's been doing is wrong, and it's not like she's doing it for some good or noble reason. Again, she's doing it for a completely selfish reason instead of a selfless reason. Because again, Harumi's only fighting against the Overlord because he corrupted the Great Devourer, and Harumi found out about that. That's it. And when it comes to Harumi and her fighting against the Overlord, initially when it came to Harumi, she was mad at the ninja because she believed that they were responsible for her parents dying, but after Harumi learned that the Overlord corrupts the Great Devourer, she essentially ended up shifting the blame to the Overlord. Meaning that again, when it comes to Harumi, she's blaming someone else for her problems, and then after the fight, like I said, the show does literally nothing to acknowledge any of the horrible stuff that Harumi has done over the events of the show, despite all the truly awful stuff that Harumi has done, and again, Harumi never takes any accountability for any of this stuff. Meaning that when it comes to Harumi, she effectively acts like she never did anything wrong. And I feel like this can especially be seen with Harumi, as I said earlier, not showing any real signs of sympathy and remorse for any of the horrible stuff that she did. And I feel like it's entirely possible that when it comes to Harumi, she doesn't actually feel bad about any of it. Because again, Harumi is essentially acting like she never did anything wrong, yet the show is essentially acting like Harumi has changed, even though I'd argue she really hasn't, because again, the only reason why Harumi fought against the Overlord was for a completely selfish reason, and then she did literally nothing to acknowledge the terrible stuff that she did. Again, when it comes to this redemption for Harumi, it's really not a redemption. It's just her blaming someone else for her problems, and then her acting like she never did anything wrong. And also, one last thing that I want to bring up when it comes to Harumi and her redemption during the events of Crystalized, I feel like this is something that wasn't really going to be able to work anyway, simply because of Harumi being irredeemable. This is something that I've talked about a few times on my channel, but personally, I am the camp of fans who believes that Harumi is irredeemable, and she's someone who cannot be redeemed, mainly due to all the terrible stuff that Harumi has done over the events of the show, the amount of terrible stuff that Harumi has done over the events of the show, just how bad some of that terrible stuff was, and also how personal some of that horrible stuff was, especially when it came to Lloyd, Garmadon, and the Emperor and Empress, Personally, I really don't think a redemption for Harumi is something that can work given, again, all the truly awful stuff that Harumi has done over the events of the franchise, especially given that when it comes to Harumi, she wasn't being forced to do any of that bad stuff. She willingly chose to do all of those evil things. So again, I don't really think a redemption for Harumi is something that can really work, and I feel like when it comes to the redemption that Harumi gets during Crystalized, this is something that especially really doesn't work considering everything that I've talked about over the course of this video. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. Overall, when it comes to Harumi's redemption during Crystalized, this is something that I feel really does not work. There's little to no setup for it, and what little setup we do get, again, I'd argue that it feels inconsistent with Harumi's character given what we've seen from her over the events of the show. Harumi's motivation doesn't make any sense at all, and when you peel back the layers of it, I feel like it makes even less sense. Harumi isn't really affected by fighting against the Overlord in any way, and it's entirely possible that Harumi remained a villain despite her fighting against the Overlord, meaning that Harumi was not affected by the fight, and again, it's entirely possible that she's still a villain, especially given the complete lack of acknowledgement of any of the horrible stuff that Harumi did. And finally, this really isn't a redemption for Harumi at all, because again, it's just her blaming someone else for her problems, and then her acting like she never did anything wrong, which again, I'd argue that really isn't a redemption. Plus, like I said, I also feel like Harumi is irredeemable, so a redemption for her is something that wouldn't really be able to work anyways. Now, is this the worst moment in all of Ninjago, like a lot of fans claim it is? Personally, I don't really agree with that, because in my opinion, the worst scene in all of Ninjago is Harumi's original redemption that we got during Season 9, but that's a video for another day. But when it comes to Harumi's redemption during Crystalized, this is definitely one of the worst moments in all of Ninjago, because it really does not make any sense any way you look at it. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So tell me down below, what do you guys think? Tell me what were your guys' thoughts on Harumi's redemption, and tell me, was there anything that I left out when it came to this analysis? Tell me down below, and I hope you guys enjoy. Later, guys, this is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.